ediprolog lets you interact with Prolog in all Emacs buffers. The main function that ediprolog provides is called ediprolog do what I mean. Depending on the content at point, ediprolog do what I mean does the appropriate thing. If point is on a query, then it posts that query, and you then interact with the Prolog top level like on a terminal. On the other hand, if point is not on a query, then ediprolog do what I mean consults the buffer. In the following, ediprolog do what I mean is bound to the function key f10. You can of course also bind the function to any other key sequence. For example, this is an Emacs buffer and we can write anything here, such as a Prolog comment. In particular, we can of course also write a Prolog query here. A query starts with a question mark and a hyphen, just as on the Prolog top level. Now the point. Using ediprolog, we can evaluate the query right here in the Emacs buffer, and then interact with the Prolog system in exactly the same way as on a system terminal. For example, watch what happens when I now press F10. So we see the system reports the first solution. We can now interact with Prolog in exactly the same way as on a system terminal. Every key we press is now sent to the underlying Prolog process instead of appearing in the Emacs buffer. And answers from the Prolog system appear right here at this place. For example, we can press space to get the next solution. We press space again to get the solution after that. In this case, this is also the last solution. The interaction is now finished and ediprolog automatically switches back to regular editing. We can remove the interaction with a simple keyboard shortcut or simply via undo. This also works if whitespace or comment characters precede the query. Now watch what happens when point is not on a query. For example, at this position we press F10 and we see the buffer is now consulted in the Prolog process. It is not necessary to save the file. The buffer content is what counts. We can now post queries that refer to the definitions we have just loaded. For example, we can post the most general query for n factorial, where all arguments are variables. We press F10 and get the first solution. On backtracking, we get additional solutions. We can stop the interaction, for example, by pressing return. Alternatively, we can press Ctrl+C and abort. Note that the system's answers are all commented out. Therefore, we can also save this interaction together with the program code. We now switch to a different buffer. This buffer also contains a Prolog program, a few facts, and a sample query. In this case, the query spans multiple lines. To evaluate such a query, point must be on the first line of the query, where the question mark appears. In this example, I'm using Ctrl+U F10 to both consult the buffer and evaluate the query at point. When you are waiting for the answer to a query, you can unblock Emacs with Ctrl-G. You can resume the interaction with the Prolog top level via the function ediprolog top level, or equivalently by pressing Ctrl-7 F10. This is because 7 looks a bit similar to a T, as in top level. ediprolog do what I mean also supports a few other prefix keys that are useful in specific situations. For example, we can press Ctrl-1 F10 to always consult the buffer, even if point is on a query. And we can terminate the Prolog process at any time with Ctrl-0 F10. ediprolog works just as well when composing an email or any other document with Emacs. If the Prolog process emits any errors or warnings when you consult the buffer, then these messages are displayed in a separate window. In transient mark mode, if the region is active, then only the code in the region is consulted. For convenience, the most recent interactions are logged in a special Emacs buffer called ediprolog history. This shows you the exact top-level interaction that has taken place behind the scenes. We can also run multiple Prolog processes with ediprolog localize. Here is how it works. Consider again the n factorial interaction. We press Ctrl-G to unblock Emacs and switch to a different buffer. However, we can neither post a query nor consult this buffer while a query is still in progress. Therefore, we use ediprolog localize to give this buffer its own Prolog process. When we now press F10, then ediprolog do what I mean takes this into account. A fresh Prolog process is now associated with this buffer. And we can therefore consult the buffer and post queries in this buffer also while a different interaction is still in progress. We can go back to the other buffer and resume the original interaction by using ediprolog top level in that buffer. We can use ediprolog unlocalize to undo the effect of ediprolog localize. The easiest way to install ediprolog is to use the built-in package manager of Emacs. Alternatively, you can also download ediprolog from the project page. Once you have installed ediprolog, you can configure it with Customize Group ediprolog.